Hello, good morning, or, well, maybe not morning for some people. Welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of, it's April, isn't it? Wow, I'm really losing time. This is bad. Our book this month is the astonishing Grafity's Wall, a terrific book that everybody should be reading. And I'm very pleased to be joined remotely from London. We have Ram V. And
hello, everyone.
There he is. And from Mumbai, we have Anand RK. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the actual last names, guys. I'm.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I'm curious how much maybe you guys can talk about the native Indian comic scene. My understanding is that it's a pretty big business there. But we never see any of it in the United States really at all.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of started in Indian comics when I was still back in India before moving to the UK. I worked with a local publisher called Holy Cow Entertainment, and I did a book that was probably at the time telling of my influences. It was an Indian version of Hellblazer, if you will. So I kind of played with Indian mythology and dark cults and sections of Hindu worship, and it did pretty well. And even at the time, there were people who had been in the industry for quite a while and said, "Oh, this is an interesting leap forward in terms of the kind of books we're making." But I think Indian industry is quite big in terms of the kind of interest that exists in reading comics. So there certainly are fans. Like, I've watched the Indian comic book convention since they had the very first one, to a point where they get 60, 70,000 people walking through these conventions every day, which is pretty huge. But I think part of the reason you don't see it beyond India is because the publishers there are very limited in that they're either fans of DC and Marvel who decided they wanted to publish books, and so end up almost pigeonholing their creatives into doing these paler versions of DC Marvel books. Or you have publishers that are really going down that indie track, but what that does is it means you're trying to sell to a very niche crowd. So unlike someone like an Image or a Dark Horse or a Boom, we don't really have publishers there that are doing independent content but still selling to mainstream readers. And I think there's also a dearth of Indian voices in storytelling. In that, even the Indian film industry, if you take it, or writing to an extent, has been very saddled by its colonial history and baggage. So we tend to make the same kind of films. We tend to tell the same kinds of stories. So it becomes very difficult to find someone doing really original work in India. That's not to say they aren't there. I mean, look at people like Anand. There are studios in India making interesting work. But you find yourself kind of working in a small niche, and there's no real way to bridge that gap between telling those stories to a niche crowd versus telling those stories to an audience that can appreciate them beyond just your orders.
Having said that, though, I mean, because there's this absence of big players in the Indian market, creators are coming out with this really creative way of telling stories. Like, I see this huge boom of zine culture right now. So we see a lot of festivals in Bombay and other major cities in India where they sell zines. They make small, inexpensive zines and sell them. And I think it's quite ingenious in that it's really effective. It's cheap, and it's quite widely marketable.
When you're sitting down in front of your word processor, or are you writing freehand? When you start the writing process, Ram, what do you do? Are you Are you laying out a story structure? Are you just starting from panel one and just starting to write? How does it work for you individually?
I do something called a rambler, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just me rambling. And I don't let myself be sort of constrained by, oh, I need to describe a panel. No, if it's in my head and I just need to write down the dialogue, then the dialogue goes there. If I can't think of a dialogue, but I know what goes in the panel, then I'll describe a little bit of what goes in the panel. And so it's just a wall of text on a Word doc, or it's just a wall of text in a notebook. I tend to do it more in notebooks just because I think the ability to doodle and the ability to sort of just scrawl in the margins is important as a creative process to when you're trying to formulate what goes in the story. So I do that. Once the Rambler is done, then I'll start looking at, okay, how do I chop this up into pages? Like, I don't know that this page has to end on this line, or it has to end with this visual. I can't carry over that, which means I know where my page ends and I have a finite amount of stuff I can fit in the page. Then comes the decision of, okay, what do I take out? If there's too much dialogue, too many visuals. Once you've done that, then you kind of portion my Rambler document into pages. And then from there, I go straight to scripting, because then it's super easy for me to go, okay, I know what stuff happens on this page, so I can fit that in. The last thing I do then is to go, okay, page turns, right? So reveals have to be on an even numbered page, although now with all the advertisements, I don't know. But at least in a graphic novel where you have control over how that's experienced, you want to put page turns on a page, you want to put reveals on a page turn, or you want spreads to kind of mirror each other, even if they're not really a double page spread. So sometimes you get to do, again, because comics is design, you get to do interesting stuff like that. Once that's done, the script is ready to go. I'll go through it all once and make sure I cut down at least 15% of the text.
Anand, for you, when you get a script, I mean, obviously you said you start doing thumbnails, but I guess I wonder how much sort of pre-visualization are you doing in terms of character and scenes, angles and things like that, and how much of it is happening at the point where you're starting to generate the thumbnails themselves, or even the pencils?
So when I start doing the whole process of visualizing a page, right? I feel that it happens twice in my head. First is when I read the script, I have a certain image in my head. This is how it's supposed to look. The acting of the characters, maybe when they're saying a dialogue, for example, the character will act a certain way, or we'll be looking at the scene from a certain angle, for example. And then when I start to thumbnail it, and then you start to think about how a panel works with the other panel and how the whole page looks, and then it kind of takes another shape. Because again, the whole page is one image instead of the other way, right? And then I think the third time is when I go in and start drawing it and look at references, and then the whole the physics of it comes into play, right? Like how a certain image looks, how a certain scene looks from a certain angle with references, and how the perspective would happen. All of those technical stuff coming into play. So I think the whole visualization of a page happens thrice in my head. I think that's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys both. Thank you guys both again and again and again. The book was GRAFITY'S WALL. If you're sitting at home, you haven't read this book yet, it's a book you got to read. Jordan will hopefully be putting up the URL for our web store that will sell you one. And hopefully Customs will free up the book plates at some point. They did a signed book plate, which is sitting in Customs right now, which is why we don't have the book plate yet. But as soon as that comes out, we'll get that out to everybody and include it with future copies of the book. Again, the book was GRAFITY'S WALL. I want to thank Jordan Willits for doing the show and helping us run this because I couldn't do this by myself. I want to
Thank
thank our sponsors at the Beat, for being a great comics website and helping spread the word. I want to thank all of you viewers at home, and I want to thank Raman and Nod for coming and talking to us. The book is GRAFITY'S WALL. We'll see you next month with another terrific book. Take care. Till then.
See you guys.